In this video, we're going to review the idea of a quadratic equation. So an equation is called quadratic if it involves x and x squared in a form like we see here. A constant times x squared plus a constant times x plus another constant equal to 0. So the equation is quadratic if it can be written in this form. For example, 2x to the fourth, or 2x squared plus 4 equals 7x minus 5 is quadratic because it can be written in the right form if we combine like terms. If we subtract 7x from both sides and add 5 to both sides, we get the right form, ax squared plus bx plus c, where in this case a is 2, b is minus 7, and c is 9. This form is called the general form of the equation, and we'll see, especially when we cover the quadratic formula, it's often very useful to have the equation written in this form. Quadratic equations show up in a number of application problems. And solving a quadratic equation means finding all the values of the variable that will make the equation true. For example, this equation, x squared minus 3x plus 2, has two solutions. We'll see later how you could go about finding the solutions, but let's just illustrate that there are solutions. X equals 1 is a solution, because if we plug a 1 in everywhere that we see an x in the original equation, and then simplify, we get 0, which is what we're supposed to get on the right side. But if we plug in a 2, we also get a solution. If we plug in a 2 everywhere we see an x, and then simplify, we also get 0. So you can plug in 1 or 2, and either way you end up with something that makes this equation true. Now, the simplest quadratic equations to solve are the ones where the middle term goes away. So where b, that coefficient of the middle term, is equal to 0. So here are a couple examples. And to see how it's easy to solve such an equation, let's take one of them, 2x squared equals 18, and see how we might solve it. Isolate x. We can first divide both sides by 2, giving us x squared equals 9, and then take a square root of both sides. Now on the right side, it's very easy to see what you're going to get when you simplify. The square root of 9 is 3. The left side you have to be careful, and this is an easy place to make a mistake. What do you get when you take the square root of x squared? Now a lot of people will look at that and think you should just get x back. Well, that's true sometimes. For example, if x is 4 and you square it, that gives you 16. And if you take the square root of that, you get 4 back. Okay, but what if x is negative 4? What happens if you square negative 4? Negative times a negative gives you a positive. So negative 4 squared is also 16. And if I take the square root of that, the square root of 16 is still 4, even though I started with negative 4. So if I plug in a negative value for x, this doesn't give me x back. It actually gives me the absolute value of x back. So that's what you end up after you take the square root of both sides and simplify. And then to keep going, if you want to get rid of the absolute value signs, what you do is you introduce a plus or minus on the other side, because there are two things you could plug in for x here that make this true. You could plug in a 3, or you could plug in a negative 3, and when you take the absolute value of either of those, you get 3. So there are two solutions, a positive and a negative, and a good way to abbreviate is with this plus or minus sign. X can be plus 3 or minus 3. And that means there are two solutions for this equation. Let's take another example real quick. 3x squared equals 45. So I'll divide both sides by 3. take the square root of both sides and simplify. So we already saw the square root of x squared gives us absolute value of x. Now, square root of 15, we're not really going to be able to simplify that except with a decimal approximation. So let's just leave it as square root of 15 for now. When we remove the absolute value signs, we insert a plus or minus on the other side of the equation here. So there are two solutions. X equals square root of 15, which we can plug into a calculator and get approximately 3.87. Or x equals negative square root of 15, which is approximately negative 3.87.